Purtroppo mi scuso, ma Andrea Purgatori, che è giornalista, conduttore di Atlantide e presidente di Greenpeace Italia, per il suo appunto lavoro alla 7 ha avuto un impegno e non è potuto essere qui. Per cui lo sostituirò indegnamente nell'intervistare Nick Clark. Hi Nick.
Hi Gabriele, hello everybody, great to be here.
Thank you, thank you.
In person, but at least it's good to be present.
Thank you for your time. Nick doveva essere qui e lo abbiamo appunto in collegamento, è un ospite speciale perché è stato a bordo della nave di Greenpeace Arctic Sunrise, impegnata in una missione di 3 mesi in Antartide. E Greenpeace si occupa dell'Antartide da moltissimi anni, in particolare uno dei risultati ottenuti nel 1991 è stato il bando allo sfruttamento minerario del 7° continente. Quindi la richiesta all'epoca era di creare questo grande parco mondiale dell'Antartide, tutelare l'Antartide dallo sfruttamento minerario. Quel risultato è stato raggiunto e la campagna in cui è impegnata adesso invece Greenpeace è per ottenere la creazione della più grande area marina protetta del mondo, sempre in Antartide. Parliamo di 1.800.000 km². Adesso vedremo questo nelle immagini e nei servizi che ha fatto proprio Nick. Prima di vedere il primo video, I want to ask you, Nick, which is your role at Al Jazeera? How is organized Al Jaz? And I know that you have been to the poles several times. You have been to the North Pole even.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I joined, first of all, Al Jazeera. I joined Al Jazeera, which is a global news network, much like Sky or CNN. Back when it launched in 2006, and as well as all the usual kind of news, we're not just Middle East centric. We will cover news across the planet, and I covered stories in Afghanistan and Libya and all the usual kind of places. But I always was very interested in environmental coverage, and I did a lot of environmental stories covering the recession of the tropical glaciers in Peru to gorillas in Uganda. And one of my favorite stories until the Arctic Sunrise mission was to go up to the Arctic and to Greenland. In fact, I've been there twice and covering stories there and mainly talking about the recession of the sea ice. And back in 2012, we went to Greenland to do that story and sailed across Baffin Bay in search of the sea ice, but it just wasn't there because it had gone back so far. It was so far north that we couldn't reach it. And we were doing stories about hunters who are having to shoot their dogs because there was no pack ice at the end of winter when there normally would be, whereby they could go hunting. So they weren't able to do it, so they would have to kill their dogs. And it was this very kind of human-animal element of revealing what it's like at the front line, at the sharp edge of climate change, which is slowly beginning to affect the whole world.
Okay. Thank you for this introduction. And now let's go to the first of your reportage, Frigid Journey.
We're going to be hearing from people all around the planet, urging them to do that. So we hope they listen.
Whoa. It's probably krill. Yeah, look at that swarm of krill, nice.
It's a city near the end of the earth, rich in maritime history. In the main square in Punta Arenas, Ferdinand Magellan looks out towards Tierra del Fuego, across the strait that bears his name. From Scott to Shackleton, this is where famous Antarctic expeditions came and sometimes returned. And today, it's home to the Chilean Antarctic Institute, a signatory to a very important treaty. Preserving the integrity of the Antarctic continent works as a kind of international cooperative. And as you walk into the Chilean Antarctic Institute, you're presented with a map of the continent, incredibly rich in resources from copper to oil to gold, and a lot of nations would like to get their hands on that, but they can't because of the Antarctic Treaty, which was signed back in 1959 to ensure, in the interest of all mankind, that Antarctica shall continue forever to be used exclusively for peaceful purposes and shall not become the scene or object of international discord. And so far, that has worked.
The principal spirit is the cooperation. In Antarctica, really, if you don't cooperate, maybe you can be or can do anything, because this is an extreme land with extreme conditions.
From Punta Arenas to King George Island on the fringes of Antarctica. It's well below zero, and the tourists off the cruise ships are on their way home. So here we are, King George Island, Antarctica. We made it. It's so desolate. It's like we've landed on the moon. This is where the world's geography is turned upside down, where Russia neighbours Chile alongside a dozen other nations' research stations. It is the Antarctic Treaty in action. Survival suits are on for the trip from shore to ship. So this is our ride out to the Arctic sunrise, who's parked up in the mist out there somewhere. On board, we're quickly on our way, southbound for the site of the proposed ocean sanctuary, an isolated wilderness of sea and ice, home to an astonishing array of life.
Our campaign sort of is for the Weddell Sea Marine Protected Area. It's a proposal by the German government and backed by the EU. And that sort of starts at about 64 degrees. It's described by everyone who goes there as pretty inhospitable. So I think that's the feeling we're going to have as we round this corner.
The Greenpeace expedition is taking in scientific studies of the ocean floor, as well as an exploration of this remote outpost. How far we get will depend on weather, ice conditions, and a good deal of luck. Nick Clark, Al Jazeera, Antarctica.
Ecco, questo è uno dei primi reportage che ha fatto Nick dall'Antartide e a questo punto non so se ce l'abbiamo di nuovo in collegamento. Volevo sapere appunto un po' da Nick le differenze anche che aveva trovato in questa spedizione. So, you have been to the Arctic, to the North Pole 3 times, I think. So this mission was much more challenging, and which is the difference between the two poles according to your view? Which is the challenge we have to face?
Well, certainly from the point of view of filming, journalistically, the South Pole, the Antarctica was much more challenging. You're not only dealing with the cold, but also the seas and rough weather. And all the pieces you're watching now, there are 5 news pieces in all. We're also editing, I should say, a documentary right now, which is going to be coming out in June and July, and that's going to be half an hour long. So it's going to be an elongated version of these pieces that you're seeing. But all these pieces were filed from on board the Arctic Sunrise. Greenpeace had organized this fantastic bit of internet kit to enable us to keep connection with onshore and to be able to file footage the whole time. Greenpeace themselves are finding a lot of footage back to base, and so were we. So that meant that we had to edit these pieces on board, and quite often it's pretty rough. The Arctic Sunrise is an icebreaker. It doesn't have a keel, and that means in the rough seas of the Southern Ocean, the boat's not only going that way, it's also going that way, pitching forwards, and sometimes you feel pretty grim. You've got to just keep on working. And luckily, my cameraman, Ben Mitchell, he was fine, so he could cope just okay and managed to get the pieces out. From the point of view, more of the geopolitical point of view of what needs to be done and how different it is, many of the problems that they're facing are obviously the same. I mean, climate change is affecting the whole world. It's just affecting Antarctica in a different way. And I think what's key about this German proposal for an ocean sanctuary in the Weddell Sea, which is backed by the EU and really being pushed now by Greenpeace, is the fact that this is an area that is still pretty much intact. One of the last great wildernesses on Earth. It is truly astonishing to go there. And so why wait till it has been tapped of its resources to try and then protect it? Why not protect it now while it's still in pretty good shape? The threats are looming all around on the horizon. So we need to just ring fence this pristine area and ensure that what's happening in the Arctic doesn't happen down there.
Thank you, Nick. So let's go to the next one, to the Weddell Sea.
The captain's eye view of our voyage south as the icebreaker Arctic Sunrise pushes through into the remote waters of the Weddell Sea, a vast unknown territory. Few ships venture this far. Our team has already made an attempt this Antarctic summer, but was foiled by ice. The captain's trying to weave a way through all these ice floes to get as far down into the Weddell Sea as possible, to try and reach the 64th parallel, the beginning of what would be the protected zone.
It looks like an opening a few degrees to port.
Yes, I'll make this break through some ice and it looks like open water after that for a while.
Finally, we break through into the isolated area of the proposed sanctuary.
At the moment, I checked on the satellite charts this morning, and there's us and one other ship in this entire space. There's us there and another ship about there, and that's it in that whole area.
That's slightly scary.
Yeah, terrifying.
Very exciting as well.
But exciting, and kind of just makes a case that this is pristine. This area is not developed. It's not got industry. It's never had industry.
You have a green light.
We take our chance in this rare window of weather to take to the air and look down on the mesmerizing scene below. The western edge of the would-be protected zone, breathtaking, the raw power of land and sea and ice constantly reshaping, on the move. This is nature on a planetary scale. So what we're looking at here is multi-year sea ice and great icebergs that have been carved off the glaciers sweeping off James Ross Island, and the Weddell Sea extends way into the distance over there. The proposed area pretty much untouched by human activity. Almost no scientific research has taken place. Back to base, the Arctic Sunrise standing by for our return. Alongside her, a giant tabular iceberg, perhaps a kilometre long. The next helicopter sortie is to the very top of it. The expedition team are making a dramatic landing to spread the sanctuary message around the world. This iceberg, thousands of years in the making, now adrift in a process that has been going on for hundreds of thousands of years, a process it seems may be changing because of global warming. And in a day of scenic wonder below, the Antarctic day ends with a spectacular show above. This, apparently, a reverse sunset phenomenon, while simultaneously the clouds morph and shape and colour into a fantastic unworldly painting across the evening sky at the ends of the earth. Nick Clark, Al Jazeera, Antarctica.
Sembra proprio di essere lì, devo dire, vedendo queste immagini. E quello che viene in mente è un po' anche la difficoltà, insomma, di questa sfida oggi nel 2018 di chiedere l'istituzione appunto di un santuario di protezione di questi mari così vasto come chiede appunto Greenpeace. E la domanda per Nick è appunto proprio questa, cioè questa proposta, come lui citava, è una proposta che è stata anche sostenuta dalla Germania e che verrà discussa a ottobre del 2018 dalla commissione che si occupa c'è una commissione insomma, che si occupa dell'Antartide, composta dai vari stati, che è più ampia di quella del Trattato Antartico. Il Trattato Antartico è stato firmato da una serie di paesi, alcuni come membri, altri come l'Italia ne fanno parte del Trattato Antartico, anche se sono semplicemente consultati. Questa commissione a ottobre 2018 discuterà della proposta di creare questa grande area protetta. So the question, Nick, is are you confident that our struggle to get Antarctica protected could be really successful or not, and what could be the role of the role of governments, role of media, or people like us?
Well, to say that I'm confident certainly would be an exaggeration. I'm not confident because look at what we've done to the world so far. But there is definitely a sea change, and speaking to some of the expedition team on board who are very much more involved in environmental activism than I have ever been, are very much aware of this as well, this kind of tipping point where people seem much more aware of what's going on in the world and what problems we face. and things are beginning to happen. You know, this whole revolution against plastic, which is beginning, certainly in the UK, is beginning to take effect, and people are very much cognizant of what's going on and what needs to be done, and that we have to stop using plastic to that degree. Climate change as a whole is more and more accepted. The recognition that we need to stop using coal is more widely held and believed. And that's changed very much over the last 2 or 3 years, and does seem to be, you know, as I say, a tipping point towards the positive side of protecting the environment. So you have to hope that a campaign like this and everything that it's trying to do will be successful, but it does need governments to engage. The good thing about this proposal is for the Weddell Sea, is that it is proposed by Germany, it's already backed by the EU, and it has a lot of global support. I don't know if you've mentioned it already, Gabrielle, but the Greenpeace campaign received 1 million signatures, the petition to make this happen, within a matter of weeks. It was incredible, the upsurge of interest. And the great thing about Antarctica is that people somehow seem to really key into it. I don't know if it's all the fantastic nature documentaries you see with the wildlife and the penguins. We're going to see more of that in just a moment. But people really understand that and really kind of acknowledge the fact that we need to protect this last great wilderness on Earth. So confident, no. Optimistic, and hopeful, yeah.
Thank you very much. Let's see your next contribution now.
Fringing the Antarctic Peninsula is abundant, a place of seemingly endless variety. The whole region is richly biodiverse, a living example of how things are, pretty much free from the influence of man. A place to breed, feed and grow. Its pristine oceans full of marine species, including more than a dozen types of whale. But getting to see the astonishing wildlife here is by no means straightforward. The weather makes everything a challenge.
Bit of a swell on today. It's gusting 40 to 45 knots. We've made very good progress in the night. We're now back in the Antarctic Sound, hoping to get to Hope Bay, which is where there's an Argentine research station, so we want to visit that. There's also a colony of about 100,000 Adelie penguins.
And then, by radio, the Argentine base says the winds have become impossibly strong.
They say now they have 60 knots for wind. 60. Very windy. It's just there.
So our mission is aborted, and we have to wait another 24 hours before making landfall on Penguin Island, near the reasonably accessible tip of the Antarctic Peninsula. A colony of chinstrap penguins share territory with a large group of fur seals, one making the most of the comfortable feathers of the molting juveniles.
Of course, the environment where these magnificent animals, this wildlife, is living is incredibly fragile and incredibly delicate. And there's all sorts of threats that they're up against, from climate change to krill fishing. And then, of course, there's this, tourism. And the tourists come here to the islands close to King George in their masses.
Some are prepared to pay top dollar to have the Antarctic experience.
There are some pressures that come from tourism. So in the background, we have a 200-person tour ship. The number of tourists coming down here, say at the beginning of the 2000s, was somewhere around 4,000 or 5,000 a year. We're now over 30,000 people a year.
2 days later, we arrive at Hannah Point on the southern edge of Livingstone Island. Here, another colony of chinstrap penguins, healthy and in good shape. They overlook a group of gentoo penguins. There's the distinctive beak of the southern giant petrel and its young. There are elephant seals, all different species, side by side on a grand scale. But across the continent, the pressures are building.
It's crazy pace of change, and at the moment, colonies like this one seem to be doing okay, but all it takes is one bad year, and we saw that in the East Antarctic last year. A penguin colony collapsed, only 2 chicks born, and so the pace of change is so quick, we don't want to add additional threats, things like fishing, which is gradually expanding.
Antarctica is still in pretty good shape, But it's apparent this unique landscape needs to be very carefully managed as multiple threats begin to loom on the horizon. Nick Clark, Al Jazeera, Antarctica.
Beh, non so l'impressione che avete avuto voi vedendo questo video, però insomma queste enormi navi da crociera a me hanno fatto pensare alle grandi navi che entrano nell'ambiente fragile della laguna di Venezia, per esempio, no? Per rimanere vicino a casa nostra. Insomma, è abbastanza impressionante, vediamo appunto una natura intatta che vogliamo proteggere, che però è già esposta a tante minacce da parte dell'uomo e anche quindi alla minaccia del turismo, che è il turismo di massa, turismo composto insomma in gran parte anche da grandi numeri di nazionalità cinese e non solo, che arrivano in questo posto. Quindi ecco un po' questa minaccia del turismo è un po' la questione, e anche avete visto in questo video che sono stati costretti a cambiare programma nel loro viaggio, a posticipare di 24 ore i programmi. So Nick, how do you feel about this, the impact of the tourism in this fragile area, and also please tell us a bit about your personal emotions and feelings in approaching to this delicate environment. How did you feel to be confronted to the force of the nature in that way?
It was. I mean, there aren't enough superlatives to describe it. It was just truly extraordinary. The strange thing about Antarctica, I always remember the first time I went to America, I got there and I thought, it's just like the films. And in a way, Antarctica is the same, because you get there and yes, the penguins are all around you. There's elephant seals just there, and there's giant petrels flying above, and seals and whales blowing. It's just extraordinary, and it's almost surreal because it's so abundant. Wildlife is just so abundant, and it's just breathtaking and staggering and humbling. And all it makes you realize is how important it is to protect it. And then on one of the landings, as you saw there, you suddenly look around a corner and there's a cruise ship with 200 people on board, all piling into ribs, coming ashore. Now, the cruise ship industry is pretty well regulated, and they do take great care to ensure that their clients do their utmost to obey the rules. They have to go through disinfectant when they go off the ship and when they come back on board, and they lay out flags for the routes that they should take to avoid troubling the animals too much. But when we were there, we saw some of them going very close to a group of fur seals, and that's extremely dangerous apart from anything else, because you get a fur seal bite, then your immediate medical evacuation is required because it can be fatal. So it is troubling seeing these tourists, and it's slightly ridiculous from a personal point of view, because you look at them and go, oh, why are you here? It's not fair. This is my place and you shouldn't be here. And of course that's ridiculous, because everybody has a right to go there. And there is a place for tourism, but it has to be very carefully, more than anywhere else in the world, very carefully corralled and managed and taken care of to ensure that this incredibly fragile arena is not damaged at all, because of course everybody has the potential to bring in invasive species, and there's all sorts of things that can ensue from too much infiltration by mankind. And just an example of how remote it is, yet how accessible it's becoming. So for the one hand, you see a cruise ship there with 200 people on board, and then that little element of the journey where we're trying to get to the Argentine base, the reason why we're trying to get there, apart from the fact there was a colony of 100,000 daily penguins, was the fact that the Argentine base were desperate for fresh fruit. And we had a whole load of bananas on board that we were going to deliver to them, but we couldn't. So they have to wait for another 4 months until they can get their next delivery. So on the one hand, it is still very inaccessible and remote, and yet you're beginning to see the evidence of greater accessibility and tourism happening.
Thank you very much. E adesso nel prossimo video vedremo come l'impatto dell'uomo sull'Antartide lo raggiunge anche con due elementi in particolare, ovvero avrete sentito parlare, probabilmente è un allarme che riguarda i mari di tutto il mondo, le isole di plastica, riguarda anche i nostri mari, anche il Mediterraneo, quindi il fenomeno della microplastica, della plastica che sostanzialmente si degrada in frammenti piccolissimi e viaggia per tutta la Terra. Nel prossimo video vediamo come anche lì arriva questa microplastica. È un altro tema, il bando della plastica monouso, su cui appunto Greenpeace è impegnata con una campagna e con una petizione. Altro tema che vediamo nel prossimo video è quello dell'inquinamento da PFC, che sono delle sostanze chimiche pericolose contenute nei tessuti idrorepellenti, in altri prodotti di uso comune, sui quali pure ci siamo impegnati di recente andando anche in posti molto remoti. Non eravamo arrivati ancora in Antartide quando abbiamo fatto questo lavoro, per andare a vedere in posti remoti del pianeta, per esempio l'Himalaya, o per rimanere all'Italia il lago di Pilato sui Monti Sibillini, andare a vedere se si trovavano queste sostanze. Ecco, queste sostanze pericolose si trovano dal lago di Pilato sui Monti Sibillini fino all'Antartide. Adesso vediamo il prossimo contributo. E naturalmente dopo ci sarà modo, io non sto interrompendo adesso questo flusso, ma ci sarà modo per porre le domande che vorrete a Nick Clark anche sul suo lavoro, oltre che su questa esperienza che è abbastanza particolare.
The Weddell Sea spreads over a vast area. In winter, 75% of its surface is covered in ice. It is the realm of the penguin and myriad marine species, but it is not the realm of man, and many want to keep it that way. So the more information the team can gather, the better the chances of winning protection for these unique waters. On board the expedition sub is Antarctic specialist Suzanne Lockhart, keen to find out what this little-known zone holds. And what she discovered was the stunning underwater realm composed of all manner of life.
It has 100% coverage of the seafloor of organisms. It has a great 3D structure which allows other organisms to come in and live there, and a really interesting species composition. And all these factors make it really difficult for a community to recover after a disturbance such as bottom fishing. We call these areas vulnerable marine ecosystems, and hopefully we can get to this and other areas we come across special protection.
The team are also searching for evidence of the less visible.
So one of the big stories at the moment, of course, is plastics in the world's oceans, and these are some of the remotest waters in the world, on Earth. So it'd be very interesting for the crew here to establish whether or not any plastics have reached this far, and that's what Grant is about to do here.
Yeah, that's right. We're just sampling the sea surface for microplastic fibres that may be present. So that involves literally filling some jars with water. We'll then take those jars back to Exeter in the UK. Evidence is growing around the world from studies that microplastic fibres are extremely pervasive, and they are being found even in the very remotest locations.
Snow samples are also taken on shore throughout the expedition in different locations to see if there's any sign of microplastics there.
Yeah, we'll have to see what we get out of the whole process.
Bigger debris even finds its way to these remote coasts. Here, washed up fishing buoys. But it's PFCs Grant and the team are on the lookout for, which enter the world's oceans through, amongst other things, washing everyday clothes.
They're a group of chemicals that are used predominantly in textiles, and they're used for Gore-Tex finishes, water repellents, dirt repellents. You find them even in household carpets these days, so not just clothes.
All this newfound knowledge will be studied and compiled once the expedition wraps up at the end of March to support the EU-backed bid to turn a major part of the Weddell Sea into an ocean sanctuary. Nick Clark, Al Jazeera, Antarctica.
I'm Nick Clark reporting from Antarctica.
Ecco, in questo contributo che è il penultimo che volevo mostrarvi, avete visto i fondali del mare di Weddell che sono stati esplorati con un piccolo sottomarino a due posti. Nelle immagini che scorrevano all'inizio della nostra conversazione avete visto lo stesso sottomarino ed è la prima volta che vengono esplorati quei fondali. Quindi diciamo questa missione di Greenpeace era anche una missione scientifica per mostrare la bellezza di questo posto, e poi è stata seguita anche invece da azioni dimostrative come fa Greenpeace contro dei mega pescherecci che sono lì per pescare il krill. E ecco, il krill, quindi questo mini gamberetto che è alla base di tutta la catena alimentare antartica. Did you expect, Nick, that krill was so vital, I mean, in the ecosystem, and so economically relevant that we are destroying this part of the planet because of krill fishing? Can you tell us?
I had heard that krill oil was used for certain elements of pills that people take for omega-3 oil and so forth, but I wasn't aware of the degree to which people were taking krill oil tablets and the degree to which it's pushed by the pharmaceutical companies, who talk about this pristine oil from the pristine Antarctic that will, protect your heart. And I had no idea to the extent to which it's used to be ground down for feed for fish farms. And when you're there and you see the krill fishing boats, we saw 3. There was one Ukrainian one, there was one Chilean one, and there was one from China as well. And they were circling round and round and round. They were doing it for days on end, and we were there just for an afternoon. We were watching them, and all around us, whales were spouting, birds were wheeling around. They were just less than 2 miles offshore. These are the prime feeding grounds for penguins, for seals, for all that life, for whales. And these fishing boats are just hoovering up thousands and thousands of tons, vast quantities of krill. And if you're there, you can just see how much the ecosystem depends on it. And as Will McCallum, who's the campaign leader, told us, he said that, back in the day, all the krill fishing companies say that krill's sustainable. There's so much there. There's enough for the animals, and there's enough for us to take it so that people can buy omega-3 tablets, fish oil tablets, and we can throw it into fish farms. But as he made the point, that's what they said about bison in North America before they went extinct. That's what they said about cod in Newfoundland. They used to say that you could walk across the backs of cod. There were so many there in Newfoundland. Now there are none. And it happens that quickly, and it could easily happen in Antarctica to krill. And if that happens, the whole ecosystem is in big trouble.
Thank you, Nick. Now, last contribution.
Antarctic Peninsula in the hope of observing krill fishing boats in action.
The main focus of the krill fishery across the entire area is in this peninsula region.
The expedition helicopter takes off, and a rare view of krill boats with their nets out, spotted fishing close to shore. They are operating within their rights, feeding the growing demand for krill-based health products like omega-3 fish oil, and they want to expand their fishery.
The krill are obviously densely packed into this area up against the island, because the boats are just circling round and round, just hoovering them up. And in amongst it all the whales are feeding. You can see them blowing and whale tails disappearing, the flippers showing, birds wheeling about.
The krill companies say they're tapping into a resource that is sustainable. But the view here on board is that is what they said about other species like the bison in North America or cod stocks off Newfoundland before both were decimated.
The areas closest to the shore are almost always where the penguin foraging grounds are, where whale feeding grounds are, where seal foraging grounds are, and it's exactly where these boats are choosing to come in and put their nets and take the krill. They're directly competing with these animals for food.
By radio, the campaign team suggests their company bosses should consider fishing in less ecologically sensitive areas, and with that, the Arctic sunrise moves on. For the team, this is just the beginning of the battle against krill fishing. Time to batten down the hatches. The ship is returning to port in Chile. There's still a major obstacle in the way, the Drake Passage between the Antarctic continent and Cape Horn, and the weather quickly deteriorates. They call the Arctic sunrise the washing machine. You can see why.
I think with the wind, it'll be probably around 3 in the morning, it said it'll increase. So if it gets too bad, what we'll do is put the nose of the ship into it and slow down and then just ride the swell.
Next morning, as predicted, it's blowing hard.
So this is the infamous Drake Passage, 6-meter waves right now, 70-kilometer-an-hour winds, but they tell me that this is quite mild compared to what it normally is. The Atlantic's over there, the Pacific is over there, and this is where both oceans converge south of Cape Horn, and the weather just keeps rolling in.
But after 5 days of stormy seas, we finally pass into the Magellan Strait. Our expedition over, the Antarctic continent behind us, and South America dead ahead. Nick Clark, Al Jazeera, Chile.
Beh, credo che abbiamo davvero viaggiato un po' con l'Arctic Sunrise questo pomeriggio qui a Perugia. E adesso è un po' il momento di fare delle domande a Nick. Io avevo già una domanda, ma c'è qualcuno con un gelato, quindi basta che alzate la mano e potete fare delle domande anche voi a Nick. My first question is about your job in Al Jazeera. How long have you been reporting on environment so far, and do you feel that the attention is growing or just keeping on this topic?
Well, I've been with Al Jazeera, as I said at the beginning, since 2006, so for 12 years now, and throughout that time I've been sporadically reporting on the environment. In the last probably 6 or 7 years, I've been doing more and more environmental stories, and at one point I went off to MIT in Massachusetts in the United States and did an environmental fellowship there, studying with some of the ocean professors at MIT, and then came back and became environment editor for Al Jazeera. And so one of the big questions that I was trying to solve when I was doing that fellowship was that, you know, as journalists, because at that time people still weren't accept the concept of climate change. And I was wondering, as journalists, why aren't we doing such a way that makes it accessible to people? Because climate change is such a thing, it's very difficult for people to engage. So how do you, as a journalist, tell that story and get people to take notice? Because it's, you could argue, the most important story around. It may not be affecting us in a way that would back that up right now, but in 100 years' time it could do, and we won't be around then, but our children certainly will be. So it's crucial, and I'm very passionate about trying to get this message across. And I think slowly, you know, filter through, and it's not only through the efforts of journalists who are trying to do this, and more to the point, environmental activists like Greenpeace and WWF and all of them, but it's also just that kind of grassroots movement, because CEOs of the oil companies, government leaders will not take any action unless the grassroots mobilize. Politicians will take action if they're not going to get voted in next time. And that's what's beginning to happen. But that really needs to, momentum needs to be kept. There is a sea change, as I've mentioned already, and it's crucial that the world capitalizes on that. The Paris Agreement happened in 2015. Things are beginning to happen. Let's just keep that going.
La linea è un po' più disturbata, adesso non so se chi ha le cuffie ha capito meglio di chi non le ha. Sì? Si capiva? Ok, perfetto. Ci sono domande del pubblico? Da quella parte?
Hello, my name is Federica Marci. I'm a journalist as well. I'm based in Beirut, Lebanon. I wanted to ask you, you mentioned a bit about your experience having to draw attention of people on topics related to the environment. So I wanted to ask you more specifically if, you know, throughout your career, you actually, you know, kind of understood what people react to, how to present news in a way that engage people. In my experience, it's very difficult to get a reaction, especially now in the Middle East. Perhaps the attention is not on the topic of the environment, but unfortunately it's tragic what's going on, especially in Lebanon at the moment. So I wanted to know from you whether you have any insight on how to basically engage people. What are the mechanisms that you might use when you need to choose what story to present and how to present it?
It is incredibly difficult. You're absolutely right, and it's how to engage people with a story that's been around for so long, told so many times. You're alluding to what chemical weapons are not to talk about right now. Beyond to say that people can't speak about this, and it's astonishing to look at those pictures. And people go, it is terrible, but let's move to something else because we've seen it before. And it's the same in a way.
Sorry, Nick, we have some problems, connection problems. Let's.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, let's try to speak slowly. We'll see if we can catch your.
Okay, I'm sorry. So, yes, and I was saying, if you look at what's going on in Syria right now, which is, I think, what you were alluding to, and those appalling scenes, the chemical weapons, people will look at that and look at the pictures, and they will say, I acknowledge that's terrible, but something else because I have seen all that before. And that's just appalling. To a degree, it's the same thing with climate change and environmental stories, because these stories have been around for so long. How do you tell it in a way? And all I would say is what I try to do, you always find the human. Somewhere like Antarctica, it's not that easy, but I guess what I try to do these is to create a narrative, the boat, and a journey, not just kind of weave colour and light, but it's a story.
Yeah. Okay. Sorry for the connection problems. We have time for a last question. There's anybody who wants to try to ask a question. I mean, if we are lucky that we can get an answer. Okay, last question. Yeah.
Thank you. Hello, I'm Krina Borosh. I'm a freelance journalist. I'm based in London. I wanted to ask how you prepared for this trip, and what kind of resources you've used to inform yourself apart from Greenpeace's very detailed research. Thank you very much.
I'm hoping you can hear me more clearly now.
Sorry, Nick. Let's try to disconnect the video. Let's see if connection is better for this last question. Now we know your face. Thank you very much for your contribution today. So you answer without the video to this because the connection is bad. Thank you.
Okay. All right. I'm hoping you can hear me better now. So for preparation, there are several things. The initial thing was just to make sure we had the right clothes, and it was incredibly difficult to decide how much material to take because you have no real knowledge about how cold it's going to be. In the event, we all took too much because it wasn't as cold as we thought, and at one point it was colder in the United Kingdom than it was in Antarctica when the big storms came rolling through across northern Europe. In terms of preparation for knowledge, yes, of course, Greenpeace had done a huge amount of research, but there's a great deal of literature that has been written about Antarctica, and I made sure that I was fully briefed on that and all the arguments. And of course, as far as the krill fishing is concerned, it's not just, there's Greenpeace and environmental activists who say, well, you can't go krill fishing, but the krill fishing industry has an argument as well, and they say that there is enough there. So you need to understand fully their point of view before you take on the story. And I think that's the key thing in all journalism. You need to understand every side. You don't necessarily want to take sides in a story though with something like this. It's categorically clear that something needs to be done. So I don't think there's an issue with boldly saying that very thing, that this is a good thing to do. So it's just understanding.
Did he answer the question? Yeah. Okay. Okay. So now that we hear you well, Nick, thanks again for being so helpful today with your intervention. Sorry not having met you in person, but you did a terrific job. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much for having me. It's been a great pleasure, and hopefully see you next year.
Okay. No, for the connection. Ok, thank you Nick. Grazie a voi. Non so se ci sono cose, insomma, domande che vi sono rimaste che invece volete porre a noi. Sappiate che appunto in fondo, se qualcuno vuole lasciare il nominativo al gruppo di Greenpeace di Perugia, c'è questa possibilità lì al tavolo, o se ci sono altre questioni che riguardano Greenpeace, io sono qui. Grazie a voi per la vostra partecipazione e ci vediamo al prossimo festival.